Good afternoon. I'm Tom Stanley, your state representative, and this is the Stanley Report, when we bring state issues to talk about and relate them to Waltham and the state of Massachusetts. And we've had the honor today of interviewing our Attorney General, Martha Coakley. Welcome.
Thank you.
You're a native of Western Massachusetts, and you received your bachelor's degree from Williams College.
Yes.
And also your law degree from Boston University School of Law.
Yeah.
That's all right. You've been a champion for consumers and taxpayers and devoted much of your career to public safety and protecting children. And I just want to mention a few of the positions you've held and some of the things that you and your office has done, and then maybe we could talk about a couple of issues.
Sure.
You worked for the U.S. Justice Department Organized Crime Strike Task Force. You were assistant district attorney and served as the chief of the child abuse unit. You were the Middlesex district attorney.
Includes Waltham.
That's right,
Yep.
includes Waltham. And you prosecuted many high-profile cases, including the Catholic priest sexual abuse scandal, and also many cases personally, including the conviction of Louise Woodward for the killing of 8-month-old Matthew Eapen a few years back. And you've also worked tirelessly to pass legislation that enhanced penalties for predators who abuse kids, and also legislation to establish human trafficking in the past year as a crime in Massachusetts. And there's so many things that you've done and your office has done. I have to mention just a few, but you've consistently challenged utility rates on behalf of consumers, and you've recovered over $100 million in Medicaid fraud at your office, and you opened a state-of-the-art cyber forensic lab, the first, and led a 49-state agreement with Facebook and MySpace to ensure age verification and screening tools to protect kids. So I thank you for that. I have a 9 and an 18-year-old. So, and your office has also recovered over $660 million for taxpayers with a $37 million budget, which is about a 17-to-1 ratio. Now, you've made it your mission in the last few years to prevent, among other things, to prevent unlawful and deceptive loans and loan practices.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about the foreclosure crisis and how it's affected Massachusetts and the country, and what your office has been able to do?
Sure, and it still is affecting homeowners across the Commonwealth. We, when I came in 2007, we were looking at foreclosure loan scams and then predatory lending. So we brought some lawsuits to establish the legal precedent that, you know, you really can't sell a financial product, a home mortgage, to someone when you know, or you should know, that they can't meet those terms. That's making a buck off someone else's unfortunate situation. And as a result of those kinds of loans all over the country, many of which were in some of our major cities and throughout Middlesex County, we saw foreclosures. We realized that in some instances, when we brought suit, we would get a remedy to, instead of somebody losing their home about to be foreclosed upon, try and get a loan modification, which is something we worked for. When we entered into the national settlement with 49 other states in the last year and the federal government, our relief was to try and use the money from those 5 major banks to provide for principal write-downs, loan modifications, and we use some of the money from that settlement to establish what we call our Home Corps, our loan modification specialists, who work with each family, with each homeowner, on ways to see if they can modify that loan, get a principal reduction that lets the homeowner stay in their home, prevents, obviously, then a potential abandoned property, a foreclosed home where there's no tax coming into the city or town. And we all know that either a home on a block or a cluster of homes foreclosed means everybody's home values go down. And so we are still working, as we've worked with the legislature this session, to try and increase our ability to stop every unnecessary foreclosure. The bill passed by the House and Senate recently would require a bank or a mortgage company, before they foreclose, to do the simple math and say, is it better to foreclose, or should we modify this loan? We don't want the banks to lose money, and we know that some homes do need to be foreclosed upon, but we've seen too many people just caught in this, getting a loan, predatory in many instances. They lose a job, the house loses value, their home is underwater, and they're stuck.
Right.
And we really have tried to and want to prevent that. I think until we do that, we won't really see the economy turn around. So we're using all these tools, including the recent legislation, we hope, to make sure that we can keep people in their homes. If not, then, okay, foreclosures can go forward, but we need to, I'd love to see this foreclosure crisis in the rearview mirror.
It is a huge problem, and in my opinion, I think your efforts in the legislation that was passed is also helping the banks.
Yes.
They often can't get out of their own way, in my opinion, and perhaps because they're so big and the problem is so large. But this is enabling them to really save money and not lose money on properties, on having to sell them through a short sale, and which is not a fun process for anyone to go through.
No, and then, talking about that, Tom, the stress on families, am I going to be foreclosed? Am I going to lose my home? That's been really difficult and continues to be. So it has been a big priority of our office to try and prevent that. And
of course, when people are able to buy homes, they buy new furniture, new appliances, and that gets the economy going and people to work, and there's more money in the economy to spend, and
they start to build equity in their homes too, which our parents got to do when they bought their homes. It's how they helped bring their families up or send us to school maybe, and so that's all come to a halt with this foreclosure crisis.
Another issue in the past year that is a serious issue is the drunk driving loophole.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about that, and why you thought it was important to get involved and for the legislature to make some changes in law?
Well, as we know, there have been a series of tightening up of the laws for punishment for people, particularly multiple drunk driving offenses. What happened when the statute was passed, and I think it was an oversight, is that the language didn't apply for when people didn't take a breathalyzer, and prior convictions was treated differently for purposes of the board of registration. And so realizing that, we found people with multiple convictions, maybe with a continued without a finding, but not technically a conviction, were not getting the license taken away, the kinds of punishment they should have. And so with the help of the legislature, we were able to literally close that loophole, just change the language so that now everybody who gets an arrest and a conviction, whether it's continued without a finding, whatever, will be treated as a prior conviction for purposes of license suspension. And we know that so many of the accidents or the fatalities and injuries are caused by people who do have the multiple offenses. Obviously, need some help. They shouldn't be drinking and driving, and we have to find ways to make sure they're not behind the wheel.
Right. As you know, many people may suffer from alcoholism, and they reach that bottom and are able to change their life around. And some people just haven't been able to do that. And we just can't let them continue to be on the road driving under the influence of alcohol and putting everyone at risk.
Just too dangerous. We've had too many funerals, in particular of young people, but innocent people out driving, and they're in an accident. So it's really a question of public safety.
In the past few years, we've had some serious storms and storm damage, and I suspect if this global warming thing is which seems like it's happening, the storms are going to get more intense and more frequently. And what happened in the past was so many people were without power for days or weeks. And I mean, thousands in Massachusetts. I think it was a Hurricane Irene and the October snowstorm. And your office, again, got very much involved in making sure the utility companies were accountable. And could you talk a little bit about that? And I know you had a brief before the Supreme Judicial Court as well, which about 4 or 5 main points that I think were the basis of, again, state legislation and hopefully changes made, and also which will enable the Department of Public Utilities, if I got that right,
That's right.
to initiate the fines that you suggested.
Right. Well, going back to 2008, we worked with the legislature to change the statute so that fines could be imposed on the DPU for not being prepared or a bad response when a storm happened, and around communication issues. Now, we've had those 2 events since that time with Irene, of course, which was a nightmare for many parts of the state, and that snowstorm. We just finished a long investigation with testimony from firefighters, police, elected officials in cities and towns about response time, about whether the utilities were ready to respond, and particularly about this communication issue. I'll just give you a quick example. One fire chief told us that they were told the power would be back on in 5 to 8 hours. That estimate changed to days, but the fire chief was never told. And it really cripples the ability of your first responders, so your police, your fire, your mayors, to dispatch first responders where you need them.
Yeah, and the confidence as well of the residents and their local officials.
Exactly, just so they can plan, you know,
Right.
Is it going to be on in 2 days or is it going to be 5? Is it hours or days? And just didn't have the telecommunication, the ability to give real-time and accurate information to people who needed it. On top of that, you know, the ways in which they prepared for the severity of the storm, where is it going to hit? And they said, well, we do it based on our experience, what I call kind of the seat of the pants approach. There are models out there with technology that would allow them to pinpoint when a storm's going to hit, what the severity is going to be, much more accurately than you can now, so that you do the proper staging. You know, if it goes all up and down the East Coast, these utilities need to bring in workers from other states, and you need to be able to deploy them where they're needed most and at the most important time. So we've recommended after that, just recently, that National Grid be fined $16 million.
Which was unprecedented, right?
It's huge. Yeah. It's the biggest fine by far, and we've only had the ability to do this since 2008. Now, 2 weeks ago, we recommended for Western Massachusetts Electric WMECO a $4 million fine. They cover a smaller area. And we have upcoming a recommendation for NSTAR, which will be similar to National Grid's.
Now, did you recommend also that, or set up a program for a lot of that money to be sent back to consumers directly on their bills? Or?
Yes. If these fines are imposed by the DPU under the 2008 statute, they will go to the Commonwealth. But we've been advocating for a while, and the House and Senate have just passed the bill that now says if those fines are levied on the utilities, those will go back to consumers. So I think that's an important victory for the ratepayer.
That's where it should go.
Exactly.
We don't have a lot of time today. Perhaps we can come back again in a year or two and go over some other issues. But there was one other, there's a lot of major bills that we've just passed.
Been a very busy session.
At the end of the session was the crime bill, so-called three strikes bill, and also health care legislation. So if you wanted to comment on any of those, I know you've been very involved with both issues and really did a report a few years ago on the health care part as well that kind of set the parameters of where we should be focusing on the cost impacts.
Well, really quickly, I think to credit to the legislature for the great work that they've done in a short period of time on very important issues, on the three strikes. I think that focuses on our most violent criminals, the people who are likely to harm, injure, kill people again. And so I applaud the legislature and the governor for signing the bill. I think it makes sense as a former DA and as someone now concerned with public safety. We've been very involved with healthcare because although we know in Massachusetts we have everybody covered, we need to keep the costs down. We've done some reports that talk about market clout and how that is a dysfunctional market. This new bill, which is complicated, but I also think provides some new ways that our office and a few new agencies, a new center and another commission, can start to take a look at what is our healthcare market like? How do we provide for the market to be flexible enough to grow? We have great healthcare here. We have great hospitals and doctors. It's a big employer. We want to encourage that. But we also need to keep an eye on that competition and the ways in which, as we really look to provide access and good health care coverage for everybody, we educate consumers, but we also make sure that the market clout doesn't create dysfunction in pricing. So we're really looking forward to trying to implement this, and I think we're trying to look in real time as the market moves forward. What do we need to do to make sure that consumers are taken care of, but hospitals and providers can still grow where they need to grow?
Great. Well, I think we're out of time. I want to, again, thank you so much for taking the time. I know you have a lot of important issues to be dealing with, and those of us in Waltham appreciate the fact that you've taken this time out for Waltham Cable Access and for this Stanley Report show. So thank you. Thank you very much. So that's been another episode of the Stanley Report, and I hope you look for the newsletter as well, which can be accessible through my office and talks about all the state issues and affecting local government, and Waltham in particular. Thank you.